Growing a business is hard, but it does not have to be. Once a week, we take a break from the hustle and bustle in business to talk about innovations and what's new in the C-suite. This is the Fractional C-Suite Retreat, and I'm Joseph Frost. Pull up a seat at the fire, grab a drink, smoke a cigar, and just join me as we relax, learn, and get inspired. This retreat is sponsored by Your CMO, helping organizations grow with better marketing strategy. Welcome. Today's guest is someone with 25 years of knowledge and experience as a management consultant and business executive. She's a process consultant and productivity expert who helps businesses scale and grow by implementing efficient businesses, infrastructure, processes, and systems. She's host of the Systems Simplified podcast, founder and CEO of Business Success Consulting Group. Welcome, Adi Klevit. How are you, Adi?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing terrific. I'm really excited to have you on the show today.
I am excited to be on the show. Thank you.
Yeah. I just got back from a long car ride yesterday for 10 hours and sat through a handful of podcasts and got me all excited to record ours. And hopefully we get some good stuff.
Absolutely.
Well, let's get started. The first question I like to ask is around opportunities in the C-suite. So is there a particular opportunity that you see today that you think other C-suite leaders need to be aware of?
Well, I think there is an opportunity. I do think there are opportunities to grow if you do it correctly, right? Because you have to attract the right personnel, the right team members. And that's what I see over and over working with clients is, the problem with the solution around hiring the right people. But you have to know how to market, yourself, the company. You have to know how to separate yourself from others. So it's more attractive, whether in any aspect, right? Personnel, but also if you want to sell the business, if you want to attract more customers, you attract the right people. You need to be able to market correctly, whatever that means to that particular segment. So if you want to attract good people, you have to make sure that you have your company in order, right? That you have the right culture, that you have the right infrastructure. I was just looking at a video that a client sent me where he created a video around his core values. That's marketing the company, right? So that's like grabbing that opportunity of getting people that they know that now it's the time for them to get the job or the work or the position that they want and go and find it. I think there are opportunities around that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I look at recruiting as just one big marketing campaign. Your company is the product or service, and the prospect is the potential employee. So have you seen certain companies do that kind of marketing outreach for recruitment really well, and others that have done it not so well?
Yeah, I've seen those that are doing it well, they really treat it like a marketing campaign. The ad is written really like they are advertising. They're advertising the company, they're advertising the position. You use they grab attention. It creates interest, etc. As I mentioned, I've seen business owners create videos using video in order to market it, in order to create what their core values are, to create the welcome video, to explain about the company, different aspects. And then you have those that are still doing it the same way and the same old way that maybe worked before, but is not working now because it's not attracting attention. I think it's really, what I've seen is those that are successful are those that are really able to attract attention in some way or another, but in a way that really rises above the noise.
Yeah. Attention is definitely the key for attracting good talent these days. But what about retention? What have you seen companies doing well to retain key employees? Because that's maybe in some cases more important is figuring out your retention strategy than how to attract new employees.
Absolutely. So in terms of retention, for my line of work, in terms of documenting processes and procedures, so I've seen that part of the retention, a big part of the retention is actually creating playbooks, creating training manuals. So you actually train the employees, but it also starts from the beginning, from the onboarding, right? Having training systems in order to onboard employees correctly so they understand how they fit into the organization and they understand what they need to do. Then having like very specific expectations and measurables, et cetera, so they know what is expected. And then there is a way to assess whether, like for the person themselves, they know whether they're doing a good job or not because it's already predefined and it's expected. So that's another way. Culture is a big one. Having a predefined culture, a very good defined culture, right? In terms of like what are the core values, and using the core values and the mission and the vision, of course, but using the core values in order to manage and in order to align expectations on a continual basis. So if you ask me what they're doing right or what they're not doing right, so if you have the core values or your mission, your vision, your culture, but it's something that is just written, it's just a document that is written but is not being used, that does not help with retention. So it's really those companies that have the retention of employees, and I'm worked throughout my career probably with thousands of companies, right? I mean, I worked with in an international consulting company, so I really got exposed to a lot of businesses and business owners. My own company now for 11 years, hundreds and hundreds of companies that we've helped. So, and I've seen companies that have employees that have been there for a very long time, very satisfied and just stay there. And I've seen companies that I knew that when I get on the phone, the next call will be, oh, that one left and that one left, right? So it's the cohesive culture makes a huge difference. And the difference, again, is utilizing it, not just saying, oh, yeah, I have my vision, I have my mission, I have my core values, but really living by it, doing job reviews or performance reviews or one-to-ones or whatever you're doing based on that, like how people fit into it and what needs to change, if anything has to change. Emphasizing it continually, demonstrating it, living by it, right? So those are the different actions that I've seen that really help in terms of employee retention.
How have you seen companies or even your own company address the culture issues in a remote first environment? There's a lot of companies with employees all over the world. And how have you seen some companies do that well as far as establishing and working on a cohesive culture that spans the globe and technology? Because when you're not in person every day, it's a lot harder, I think, in my experience, to try to build that culture. How have you seen it play out?
Yeah, it's a good question. It is harder for sure. It's much simpler if you're all in the same room. We're all in the same room, or we talk, and then you have that human interaction, which really goes a long ways. But myself included, I have employees all over, right? And we have to make it happen. So I really think the first thing, and I know it sounds very trivial and maybe, oh yeah, of course, but you have to define it. I still see many companies that do not have their core values well defined. They don't have their mission. They don't have their vision. So then people are basically floundering. They just invent their own, right? So have it well defined is the number one priority. I've seen it done very well by explaining and interpreting from the top what it means. So when you say that your core value, and I know a lot of companies put it there, it's, like, let's say integrity, right? For me, I think that integrity, it goes without saying. I mean, how can you have a business with no integrity, right? With no honesty? But if it definitely is a core value, but I think it's like such a fundamental core value that it can be stated, but there should be others that should be stated more, like who you are, differentiate you from others, right? But let's say you decide to integrity and honesty is part of your core values and mentioning it, right? What does it mean for you? Because what integrity means for me, maybe not what it means for another person. So that interpretation, and that not just using one word, but actually explaining what it is, telling the story behind it, give examples of how you do it, that goes a long way. So that way you create that agreement and that understanding between the group members. So especially when you're remote, you have to create more and more of that understanding and the interpretation. But then you also ask your team what it means, right? You can do a survey and ask, okay, here are your core values. what does it mean for you? How did you manifest that? Or how did you give us an example of how you used it this week? How did you bring it to life, in your personal life, in your professional life? How did you actually demonstrate it? How did you use it? And get it to share it with a group, so you can have a Teams channel, a Slack channel, whatever you use in order to have the internal communication, where you actually have a channel for core values and you actually share your wins and successes of how you implemented it. So you need to be creative on how to bring those things to life, but having it constantly top of mind. That is the challenge, right? Because again, when we're in person, we bring it up and we have it, we discuss it, we see it, we can comment when it's not, we can comment when it is. But here you have to create those communication channels where you put that communication knowingly and intentionally and repeatedly. So that's what I would suggest. And also create avenues for the team to interact with each other. Again, so it can be a team channel, it can be a Slack channel, it can be whatever you do, whatever you use for communication, but do it also, you can have different channels for them to interact on different interests. So it depends on the size of the company, right? But they might have interests where they want to share new technology, or they want to share whatever their interest is. When you have to also let the group decide what is it that you want to talk about, and then create those channels for them to talk about.
Do you think you can measure culture objectively?
I think it measures by the company succeeding and meeting their KPIs or the key measurables. It's kind of like, if you look at let's look at a sports team. When they have a good culture, when they work well with each other, when they know what they're doing, they're coordinated, they work as a team. At that point, they will score. They will be the winners, right? I mean, they will win, or if they didn't win, then they regroup and figure out what to do. But you have to have good culture. A team that is dysfunctional, a team that the members are not working with each other, a team where they don't collaborate. I mean, when we're talking about sports, that you do need a team to work together, then they're also not going to be able to win. They're not going to go to the championship. They're not going to be a team that people will look up to and say, I want to be part of that team. So the answer is yes, because I do believe that having a strong culture will demonstrate itself with having high statistics. So that will be the way to measure it.
So you would suggest a high performing team would be representative of good culture.
Yeah, because I don't know how you can have a high performing team without a good culture, right? Or that is substantial and that stays. I mean, think about it. If you have a culture of, well, it depends also what the culture is. I mean, if people agree to the culture, right? I mean, if you have a culture of duress and punishment and, and basically yelling and making people wrong, I mean, they are not going to be able to survive very well. It's not going, I mean, how can they be successful unless you have team members that's their agreement and that's how they like to live, which is kind of like, you go like, how can that be, right? So if you really look at it, if you have a team of collaboration, of understanding, of kindness, doesn't mean that that it's not, you don't have targets and you don't go for it and you don't take it seriously, right? So it's another thing. It's like you take things seriously and you want the success and you work together to achieve it, but there is respect, there is ability to thrive for each individual as well as the group, then the group can flourish. So I think it's just really looking at that. I mean, what is culture? How does it manifest itself? And the end result will be to achieve the end result of the organization.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic because it can be a little fuzzy what culture is and is not in an organization. I think values is certainly probably the most easy way to describe culture, is what do you value, and measuring how often or how close those values are held within the organization could be a measurement. It's certainly one element, but there's also just kind of an intangible feeling that you get inside certain teams and organizations that it's hard to describe unless you're part of it or around it, for sure.
Right.
You're a process person, like that's your career and your business is helping businesses that build and establish and maintain processes. Can you put a process around culture?
Yes, actually, as a matter of fact, I've done it several times. I worked along executive coaches and leadership coaches that created the culture. And the process is the process of implementing it. It's the process of creating some kind of a system where you actually revisit that culture or revisit what you have in terms of the values, the mission, the vision, and creating a playbook around it in terms of how do you bring it to life? How do you implement it? It can be a process around creating events for the company, creating internal events, and what do we do, right? I mean, if you have retreats for your employees. So that's another one in terms of creating the culture in a remote team. So definitely doing those retreats or those times when the people get together and they know each other and they meet each other, it goes a long ways, because then you get that connection and then you go back and then you still have that connection in person. So that's the process. How do you do those retreats? How do you do your evaluations? How do you let people know if they're doing a good job or not doing a good job? So what are the steps in order to do that? So there are definitely, you have to create a system in order to develop and implement the culture in an organization. So I think it's an excellent question. And yes, it can be done, because you do have to do repetitive things in order to make sure that the culture is being maintained, being implemented, and then also being maintained. So those things that you found successful have to be put in, right? So let's say I was talking about the communication channels. When somebody needs to moderate it, somebody needs to create it, somebody needs to document what they are so they're not being changed, right? So then we create a policy around, okay, those are our Slack channels and this is what we use it for. There is a whole culture also around communication. Like, how do we communicate in this company? I mean, do we just hop on a Zoom call every single time that we have a problem? Do we present solutions? So is it okay to bring a problem and then brainstorm it? Or do we want to, or we present it in a way like this or a way like that? Those are all agreements that have to be documented as well. So then the next person that comes in, they understand what is going on and what is the actual culture. And also for existing staff members to review and to also use it in correcting somebody if you feel like they're not part of the culture. Another thing that I really like to document, and we call it the culture book. So it's not the employee handbook where you have your rules and regulations and the policies, which is very important, right? But that's the role of the HR. The culture book, which is also in collaboration with HR, it's really a book that gives you the do's and don'ts and what it means to be a part of this organization, who we are, what we believe in, what are our core values, what is expected from an ideal staff member, an ideal team member in this organization. What are the measurements for success? So how do we evaluate success in this company? Is it just dry metrics of like, did we make our revenue or did we make our profit margin, or are there any other less tangible measurements of success that we also like to look at? What if you come on board, what is expected of you? Like what should you expect from the group, from the company, etc. So that's another thing to document.
Yeah, culture book. Have you seen some companies that have drafted or put together culture books that you thought were just amazing or out of this world, or is that just kind of a page or two of the policy manual for new employees?
No, I mean, there are many companies that I work with because we implemented that, since, I found about a culture book. I got exposed to that idea like a few years ago, and, I knew it existed. And then I looked at one and it wasn't as good as I thought it should be. Then I looked at one, it was really good, and then I start looking more into it, and if you Google culture books, you can see examples actually from the bigger companies, like HubSpot has a really good one. And I think Zappos, I mean, you can see the whole thing, but you can see parts of it. And Then I decided, okay, this is when I document processes for HR, that should be part of it. If they first of all, did they define the key components, which I already said, but then how do you document it? How do you create a process around it? And part of it is creating a really good culture book that they are really proud of, because the culture book should really be who you are. When you show your culture book for your company, you should be proud of that. You should go, okay, this really represents who I am. This really can tell another person the rules, the do's and don'ts, and rules of how to be part of this organization culturally. So I've seen many of those that we created that are definitely, and then been improved by our clients, that are definitely really good and being referred to and made a big difference. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I need to look into some of those. I think it's a great idea. I remember I interviewed Will Scott. He's an EO member out of Wisconsin, and he talks a lot about culture, and he's done a lot of work around bringing that to life. And a lot of it is in graphics and signage and just experience, just to try to make it more fun and interesting to employees to engage in those values, rather than just being a black and white set of writings on the wall. So I think
I love that. That's great.
He's done a nice job there. So I should connect you.
Yeah, check it out. That's great.
So one of the things that I've been talking to people a lot about is remote work. And you mentioned you have some remote team members. Tell me about kind of your tips and tricks for managing a remote work team.
It's interesting, because that's a good question I like to ask also my guests, because I think we're all trying to figure it out, right? I mean, that's that remote culture that really start happening during and after the pandemic more than, it was there before, but it wasn't as obvious, and it didn't encounter it that much. I remember pre-pandemic, I heard that people have like 35, 40 people remote, and I go like, wow, this is a great concept. And then it happened after the pandemic. I was like, yeah, I can totally do that, because our work is remote. We work with clients all over, so it's not a problem to do that. So tips and tricks, and I can tell you, not just for myself, but also working with clients and interviewing people that have done it successfully. It's really about having some kind of a structure, right? Morning huddles, so everybody's on the same page. So that there is a group, because I like to, when I address a problem, I always like to identify the things that might not go well or not going well, or the things that are a problem, and the things that are going really well or can go well, right? So if you look at if we look at this beginning in terms of like what cannot go well when you have remote teams, so they can feel by themselves, they feel not coordinated, because they might think that you are thinking about one thing and you're thinking about another thing. So there is no coordination, and then their efforts go for basically nothing, because you're not aligned. So it's lack of coordination, lack of feeling that there is a group. You can also feel like you have no control about what is happening. They might have 3 jobs that they're working on, and you don't know what they're working on, right? And you don't want to micromanage. You don't want to be like policing what they're doing, but you want to have that respect and honesty and integrity, right? And knowing that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. So we need to have a mechanism for that. So in order to resolve that, I think really having a system of meetings, so a morning meeting, so everybody's on the same page of what is happening that day and what to do. Then there can be smaller meetings of the groups themselves, like within the organization, so not everybody together. So you can have a morning huddle, like a standing meeting, where it's really fast, 10 minutes, but everybody's on the same page, and then they start. Then you have, the group coordination meetings. But just like anybody else, I don't like meetings, not meetings for the sake of meetings. The meetings have to be with a very good agenda. And what I find is that if you write that agenda in whatever project management system you use, like whether it's Asana, Monday, Monday.com, ClickUp, I create an agenda there. Like, for instance, we use ClickUp. I have an agenda, a board, or a list that is actually an agenda of the meeting, and then you can type it in there. You go through the steps. You don't just go all over the place, but you stay very focused and with a certain amount of time. And if there are things that need to be discussed after, you discuss after, not during. So it's very methodical, very concise. So the meetings are there to coordinate, and then you work after that. But you have accountability. There has to be accountability. There has to be action items that come out of the meeting, action items that are decided on. That's what you're going to work on. And then you make sure that there's a due date and you assign it. So you have a methodology, you have a system, right? So one of the things that we found very successful in our company is to communicate via ClickUp. So, but again, it can be Monday.com, it can be Asana, it can be a Microsoft tool, but it's a project management system where we have all of our projects there, and we communicate back and forth on the project, on the target there. So it keeps it very organized, and it's a collaborative tool. So you don't feel like you are just here in a silo, but you are actually part of the group because we communicate back and forth. Another tip is we have a very well-defined communication policy and a communication process. What goes where? Like, how do you communicate via Slack? How do you communicate in ClickUp? When do you communicate via email? When do you actually schedule a Zoom meeting? So we have that very, very controlled, which helps everyone, because then there is no confusion around communication, and it gives you the ability to communicate freely and for the communication to be received back and forth. So that is one of them. Another one, in terms of solving the problem of figuring out if the output is correct and if the person is actually producing, is really have measurements, KPI, statistics, metrics, whatever you want to call it, a scorecard, tied into the different processes that need to be done, because then you can see if there is production coming out and it is satisfactory and it is meeting the goals of the company, then we know that people are doing their jobs, and then we don't have to go and dive in and micromanage. So that is also a good tip for that. Now, in terms of looking at what is working well, like in terms of like not a problem, but like what people like, right? What they like to interact. They like that feeling of a group. So again, it's doing those retreats. If that is completely not possible, if you have team members overseas and you're not going to fly everybody to a location, or it's not something that you would like to do, then do something. Even if it's online, do something different, right? Figure out what is it that you're going to do. Have, again, an agenda, not just people. I mean, sometimes it's good to have no agenda, and the agenda is basically to people just come on this Zoom meeting and, have a happy hour, a dinner, a lunch, whatever, and just people just chit-chatting and talking. But that is fine to do at certain points or at certain occasions. But then when it becomes, okay, well, let's just do it every month, then it just doesn't work, because then it becomes old and then people don't find value and they don't show up, right? And we all have experienced that. I mean, at the beginning, it was a novelty. Oh, wow, okay, let's do this event online, because we had no choice. But as you can see throughout the pandemic, it just became less and less, and people less and less in terms of the attendance online, because people got sick of it. I mean, they got tired of it, right? So you have to keep it new. You have to keep it exciting. You have to keep it engaging. So whether you are doing an event to give awards, so then people will want to show up, right? Or you have an event where you play some kind of a game, or you have a presentation by the team, so you rotate. So people, that by the way, I found successful, that you pick a topic and then a team member prepares for it, and then they give the presentation. And you can also survey what is the topic that the rest of the team want to learn and know about. And then people show up to listen to that team member, and then you rotate. So it's not the same speaker every single time. Maybe you bring an external speaker that is of interest, right? So you have to be very creative, but you still do those, you create those experiences that you all experience together, because that is very important in order to maintain a group.
Yeah. You give a lot of gems in there. That was terrific. I've also encountered a lot of the different ways of doing remote meetings and remote work over the last several years. We were remote and virtual before the pandemic, so when it hit, was kind of business as usual. But now it's become, expected to be remote often, especially with client work, but with existing team members, it's starting to. I think there's a real opportunity for companies to really optimize that experience as a recruiting tool. Like if you're working for a remote company that is investing in and innovating and trying to be better and better and better remotely, that's going to be different than the company that just, status quo. And one of the things we've found is a little contrary to the agenda-driven meeting that you mentioned, but probably not much, because you suggested also agenda-less meetings as an importance. What we found is that we took our standard weekly meetings, and rather than be as rigid as we used to be on our time, like 5 minutes here, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes here, we actually expanded it and intentionally allowed for more conversation during our weekly meetings, because the aha moment for me was that's normally, those weekly scheduled meetings are normally the only time people are having regular communication as a group. And so we had to be more intentional about allowing some of that normal chit chat that happens around the water cooler or in between meetings, stepping into somebody's office. It doesn't happen remotely. And so the only time it can happen intentionally is in those regular scheduled meetings. So we allowed our meetings to go a little more loose. And we also rotate a different leader of the month of those meetings. So if it's a weekly meeting, one leader is going to run that meeting for the whole month, and then next month it's a different leader. And that weekly meeting leader can set and adjust aspects of that agenda to kind of fit their personalities or their interests. So specifically the intro, the first used to be 5 minutes of kind of check-in segue time. We allow for 15, and that can be whatever the person wants to do for the first 15 minutes. We've done scavenger hunts, we've done icebreakers, we've done just get to know you. We've sung songs. We've got a team in the Philippines, and their Christmas season starts like a month and a half ago. It goes forever. And so one of the questions about a month ago that one of the team members posed to the group is, what's your favorite song, and can you sing a few lyrics, a Christmas song or holiday song, and can you send a few lyrics? And so everybody shared their own personal songs and sang, and it felt awfully early for singing holiday music in late September, but that's fun. It's part of the fun of working with different cultures, because you have different things that are going on in those different countries at different times. And so bringing that into the team was really a lot of fun.
Wow, that's great. So how long is your meeting?
Well, we have most of our team meetings, kind of I have our 90 minutes. But as you go, to smaller and smaller, I shouldn't say smaller teams, but some team meetings are just an hour. That are don't want the 90 minutes or needed, but the meetings that I'm in mostly are 90 minutes long.
Yeah, you see, the thing is, like for instance, I was talking to a client, and actually with her team, which is also in the Philippines, and we were going to institute a meeting, and I was there in order to go over the process and how we do it, etc. And the people actually said, we don't want more than 60 minutes, right? Because otherwise, if they just go on talking and talking and talking, it just goes on, and then they are kind of like tired of meetings. So I think it's really having options and looking and experimenting what works for you.
Right.
And it might be that you need to have it really the question I like to ask is, what's the purpose of the meeting, right?
Yeah.
When you come out of the meeting, what is the purpose? So if the purpose is to increase the camaraderie and basically be able to be in communication with each other and create more of a team, then there is a purpose. If the purpose is really the coordination and making sure that you go through the agenda because you have issues you have to discuss, you have to have action items, etc., there is a certain aspect to it as well. But you also have to align it to your culture. And I love the idea of, the segue, the beginning of the meeting, like a 15 minutes, and every time something different. So it's not the same old, maybe sometime I don't have some good news I want to share, right? But I want to have something else, I want to talk about something else that interests me. Or maybe I want to mention a great movie I've seen, right? So that can be like whatever the icebreaker is. I love the idea on the singing and whatnot. So I think the moral of this is that, there need to be communication, like going into no meetings and no communication. No, that's not good. But we need to also figure out like what works, right? And ask the staff what works for them. Because when we asked the staff with the client I just told you about, they wanted the structure because it was too much no structure. It was too much loose. It's too loose. And then they cannot plan around it when they're going to go back to work. So I think that aspect of having it structured when you need to, and then also not structured, and the team knows about it, and they know that this is the time they can chit chat and collaborate. But there's also should be an opportunity for everyone to communicate, because sometimes you'll have those that are more extroverts and they will take over the meeting, right? So you want to make sure that there is, even to the social ones, there is some kind of a structure or breakout rooms or the icebreaker or an opportunity for everyone to talk and feel comfortable. Because I don't know, maybe not everybody will feel comfortable singing, right? So there can be an option, if you don't want to sing yourself, then play just hit play and play your favorite Christmas song, right? So but I love it. I love the creativity. And I think the main thing is really think outside the box, really look at your team, observe and look at who you have there. What interests them? What makes them happy? What brings them into more communication? And then do more of that, as opposed to imposing an idea that you have without really observing and looking and seeing if it works. So I think that is the key thing, is to stay flexible. Because I know a lot of, when you think about processes, then people think, oh, it's so rigid and now I'm going to lose my creativity, or I'm not going to be able to do things. And it's really not. I mean, I interviewed so many marketing agencies on my podcast just for that reason, just to convince the world that processes, that you can succeed without having systems and processes. But you don't also, it's kind of like a pendulum. It swings from one side to another. You don't also go into like, okay, this is the only way we do it, and we don't think, and we're just like robots and we are like doing everything automatic. No, it's kind of like you have the system so you can bring your creativity, you can observe, you can change, you can collaborate. And that's why systems are important, because sometimes without systems, it's kind of like, think about a meeting that you had when somebody went on and on and on. There was no structure. It took about 3 hours later, the meeting is not done yet. And then there is no action items. So we're still like going in circles, right? So somebody can say, oh, well, yeah, we don't like structure. So here you go. Well, this is what happens when you don't have structure. So you really have to meet somewhere where you have the structure, but you still have the creativity and ability to look, observe, and change and adapt to what works, which is your example.
Yeah, I think in a remote environment, it just seems like there needs to be more time for less structure inside of traditionally structured meetings. That's kind of a lot to say in that sentence there. But when you're in an office building and everybody gets to see each other before work, after work, at break, in the lunchroom, in the hallways, when it's time to meet, it should traditionally be very agenda driven, and let's get to work. Let's get out of this meeting fast and get back to work. But when you don't have any of that interaction, then that meeting time seems like, to your point, if part of the objective of that meeting is we also team build during our meetings, it's just an add-on to the agenda, or it's an add-on to the objective. And so if you're going into that meeting knowing that part of this meeting is team building, then you kind of accept some of that flexibility and fluidity. But if you go into that meeting where everybody else is trying to have some chit chat and some fun and some interactions, and you're really agenda driven, you feel out of place. And so it gets down to communicating those objectives up front and have everybody on the same page.
That's right. And that goes back to your question about documenting culture. Well, that's part of it. This is like, okay, those are the meetings that we have, and this is what we do in each one. So then it's coming back to basically agreeing on it, like have agreement ahead of time, and then people are happy with that.
For sure. The other thing we did recently in our meetings, or in one of our meetings, was just ask the question. It's an exercise I've done before called Stop, Start, Continue. What should we stop doing in these meetings, start doing in these meetings, and continue doing or optimize in these meetings? And it was a chance to get feedback from our team as to what seemed to be working for them. And some real interesting takeaways. I remember one specific thing we should stop doing is stop going over time on our updates. So we've got updates, a few minutes. Everyone gets to give a quick update of what's going on. And some people were longer and more, wordy than others. And somebody said in the meeting, we should stop allowing people to go over. And that's a perfectly good thing to bring up. Everybody in agreement? Yes. Okay. We're going to stop doing that and be a little tighter on the schedule. That was just a good example. Another thing, one of the team members said we should start showing more gratitude and appreciation in the meeting. And I thought that was interesting. And I asked her to share more. She goes, it'd be really nice if we all could, at certain times in the meeting or once in a while, just show some appreciation to one another. And then she proceeded to go around the Zoom room and gave a 30-second thank you to each person in the room as an example. I thought that was a great thing to bring to the group from that I would never have came up with on my own. It just came out of that question: what should we stop doing, start doing, continue? So we're encouraging people now when we end the meeting. We usually do a last word, just kind of go around the room and say one more thing. Anything else on your mind? Now we're asking people to say anything. And anyone you want to give a special shout out to or appreciation as well, this is the time to do it. So we just changed the meeting structure simply based on that feedback. And it's noticeably changing. I'll say the culture of those meetings now are more gratitude, more appreciation. They're warmer. And that's just great to get that feedback.
That's amazing. That's great. It's a great exercise and great feedback for sure.
Yeah, it's very simple. Just to ask the team, what would you stop, start, and continue?
Yeah. And one thing we're talking about the meetings and the culture and documentation. One thing that is very important is also be prepared for the meeting, because you can see, especially online, because you're there on the screen and you can share your screen or not. And, like when you share your screen, you can see if you're prepared or not. Yeah. So instead of spending time during the meeting, figuring out the issues or giving an update, you can also, of course, you can give an update very fast, to the point, but be prepared. So that will also allow people not to go over or, just ramble on and on.
Yeah, we've definitely seen different level of preparation for the updates. That's the weekly update is kind of a newer agenda item that we've added to our meetings, and it's taken a while to tweak and get people used to it. And some people are like me, just show up and kind of wing it. I've got a 9 quick start on my Colby Index. That's just how I'm wired. And other people show up with a PowerPoint presentation ready to go. So there should be some expectation in between there and allowance for a little bit of nuances based on personalities.
For sure.
Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit. Adi, what is something that you like to do for fun?
I love the outdoors. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and I love hiking. I love going just anything outside. And we had a beautiful, the weather here has been great. So hiking, going to places where I can, you hike up and then you have tons of space that you can looking at the mountains. It's just it's what I love about living here is that you can drive for 30 minutes and you feel like you're on vacation. And many times I tell my husband, we don't even need a vacation because this is why go somewhere else where this is so beautiful here, right? You can drive 30 minutes, be outside of the city. You can be in the Columbia Gorge. You can drive an hour and a half and you are on the Oregon coast. I love doing that. I love to just taking that time and hike and be outside. I like doing that for fun. I also like reading for fun. I like knowledge. I like absorbing knowledge, learning about people. I love inspirational books, inspirational movies where people tell about their lives and overcoming obstacles. I find it very inspiring. So that's That's fun.
Great. We were just I mentioned earlier, we were just in Colorado. That's where we drove back from, visiting my son in the mountains. And we took a weekend away from his school and went into Estes Park area and spent a couple days hiking and just had some beautiful hikes up to one to the lake called Gem Lake. And then another was just up to the top of a mountain. And we don't get those elevation hikes around the Omaha, Nebraska plains area, but it is something, you just feel really good about yourself when you go on a kind of destination hike and you arrive at this beautiful place that's otherwise remote that you can't get to easily. And there's just something unique and special about that for sure.
It's interesting. You just mentioned it and I just made me think about it. It's also part of it is, I guess, is the destination, right? Because you have a goal you want to achieve. There is, it's strenuous at times. So you kind of like you overcome, physically you just do something that is hard or harder, but then you also have like that reward at the end because you arrived at some point and then you can see the lake, you can see this, you can see that point. Another, we just went to, this is more of a drive, but Crater Lake, it's beautiful, right? It's about 5-hour drive from where I live, but it is so pristine, so beautiful. And it's just you and nature. And there is something so special about it, of the contrast between a very busy, all the time, go life and going to such an environment that is serene and quiet and you're doing something different. I think that contrast really gives a lot of, it's really good.
I think so. And just allowing yourself to escape from the day to day, whether it be a destination drive or hike or opening a book, those just that giving yourself that time to shut down a bit and get away from the day to day kind of grind is so important.
I agree.
That's a good question for my next one of my next meetings is how do you get that escape? What's your favorite book to read or destination to go to in your area? It's that would be fun to hear everybody's take on that.
Right. I agree.
Do you have a book that you've read recently that you've enjoyed?
There is actually several of them. And I am right now, I got recommended several books about marketing and I'm reading them. There is I can tell you, hey, read this one because I got nuggets from all of them and I actually made a list. Like I like to summarize it. So I'll show you. Well, I don't know.
Oh yeah, please do. I'd love to hear.
I have a little booklet and a book and then I just like a journal and then I just go, okay, learn this and this and this. This is what I learned. This is what I learned. It's a combination of different aspects. I don't necessarily go, oh, this is like amazing, but the one I wanted to show you that I thought was really good was got recommended to me and I thought it was really good. It's about culture. It's Culture by Design. And that's where I now it's start playing. I left them a voicemail. Yeah. But it's Culture by Design, which I think was a really good book. And talks about that analogy on the teams, like how the team, like when you have a really good sports team, it is like why one city has a good, like known for that particular sports and another one doesn't. What? I mean, think about it. You go, oh yeah, I'm going to go to that high school because it has like that really good team, but that one doesn't. So what makes the difference? And he really goes into it in terms of the culture of that particular school. So that perpetuates, and I thought it was really good. I just finished listening to it.
Yeah, I think I think sports analogies are easy to think of when we think of teams and businesses. It's just kind of a natural go-to, but it is so similar because you have generally some sort of ownership group, and then you have the kind of general administrative management group, and then you've got the coaches, and then you've got the teams, and even sub teams, and so there's a lot of similarities there. And I always wonder, when as a as enthusiasts of sports, you think you see these great teams. There's generally a dominating player as part of a great team, as well as a really good coach. And that's almost independent of the ownership structure. I just watched the big Michael Jordan documentary, last couple of years it came out. And, their ownership group was a little suspect, but when Michael Jordan was there and Phil Jackson, and they brought all the cast and characters, they dominated. And then when they started, pulling either a player or two out or a coach or two out, things just weren't ever the same again. And so I wonder how much of those teams are successful based on players, coaches, or culture. And who brings the culture? Is it the player, the coach, or is it the ownership group? Those are very interesting questions.
It is. It's very interesting, and that's that book got me to think about that. Another one that I did enjoy, and I found it very useful is it's called "They Ask You Answer," and it really talks about the importance of answering questions that your audience or your potential clients are going to ask. And how do you answer it before they ask you? So you prepare them, you have it on your website, you have it, in your sales presentation, you go over it. So then they go, oh yeah, I was going to ask that question, but you already have the answer ready for it. So I thought it was a really good exercise to write down all the answers, or to have all the answers for questions that it's like a frequently asked questions, right? But sometimes you have a business that you don't think about frequently asked questions, because you go, oh, well, I don't have it. I don't have an FAQ on my website, right? But I think it would be a really good idea, because then you are basically answering their questions before they ask it. So then when they come and talk to you, they're already ready to do that.
Right. Yeah. My most recent book that I'm reading is called Debrief to Win, and it's by an Air Force commander that was in the training academy, essentially. Mm-hmm. And he's sharing in that book the tool of a debrief. They would do a debrief after every mission, and just the steps of going through the debrief. And what I took away from it was that it's really about having everybody understand how to make better decisions the next time. And so the debrief is really this decision-making optimization tool or process. And because they did it on every mission, everybody knew what was happening. Everybody thought about it ahead of time. They debrief after time. And it's just this continual decision-making improvement, because ultimately that's what they were trying to do, is make sure that their fighter pilots were prepped to make the best decisions in the hardest of circumstances. And that debrief tool was the way that they would, one of the ways, obviously, that they would do that. And so what a great leadership tool. I mean, that's what we're trying to create internally with teams, right? We just want better decision makers at all levels of the organization.
I love that. Another one I'm going to start that somebody just recommended, one of my guests recommended, is The Ultimate Sales Machine. So he said that's it's not just about selling. I'm on my Audible, so it started playing, but it's The Ultimate Sales Machine. So I just got it. I'm going to start listening to that in terms of really, I don't know what to say because I haven't read it yet, but that's definitely, last podcast I did, my guest recommended it and we're like, okay, I'm going to definitely read it. He says that that's like his whole business Bible is that book. So it might let you know after I read it, right?
Yeah.
But definitely, so They Ask You Answer is Marcus Sheridan. That's the one I was talking about. It's really good.
Great.
Yeah.
Are you're an Audible gal? Is that what sounds like? You like to listen to your books or read books? What's your preference?
I prefer reading. However, the time, I definitely have my Audible, in terms of like, it's just faster when I drive, when I go for a walk, when I do this, I do that. But there is something magical about opening a book and start reading it. It's kind of like you can highlight, you can go back to it. It's easier to do that.
Yeah. Have you used Blinkist?
No, what's that?
Oh gosh, it's like Cliff Notes for books.
Ooh.
So when I get a recommendation these days, like I'll look up the Ultimate Sales Machine or what, I forgot what we called it, but I'll go to Blinkist first. And Blinkist, it's like 10-minute clips, audio and written, that you can get the synopsis of the book. So you pop in and it'll, in 10 minutes, you'll get the summary of, what's being discussed at a high level inside that book. So it's great for business books.
Yeah, for sure.
Generally, that's 300 pages around 10 minutes of concept. And so you get the 10 minutes out of the Blinkist.
Excellent. Well, I'll check it out for sure. Yeah.
Well, good. Well, Adi, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed it. I've got some books to read now on my next hike out to the wilderness. So thank you for that.
And I have a book. I'm going to read that debrief book. It sounds really good. It sounds exactly like, it's a process on how to debrief. And I love learning about processes that work by people. So I definitely will listen to that.
Yeah, it's a great process-driven book. So, and then for our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and hopefully you've had a chance to get to know Adi a little bit more. And if you want to reach out to her, we'll have her contact information in the show notes. But I'm sure she'd love to hear from you and maybe some of your favorite destination spots and books of your own. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk more with you next week.
Thank you. And thank you for having me as a guest.
Yeah, it's been terrific. Thank you. And that's a wrap. There's another successful episode of the Fractional C-Suite Retreat. See our show notes and more episodes at fractionalcsuiteretreat.com. This podcast is sponsored by Your CMO, helping organizations grow, save time and money with better marketing strategy and fractional execution. Visit them at yorcmo.com, yourcmo.com. Spelled wrong on purpose.